Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to go this a second time. You only know it as the first because we had a glitch with the streaming platform, but we're going to go this for the second go around. Joining us today is obviously we have Robert here, and we are working on the other guests of the show, the co-host of the show, to joining us. We have had some issues with some of the other two guests. They hope to be joining us later if possible. However, Robert is here joining us to talk about his oft injured Chargers, which we will get into later because, well, why not? However, we are going to be joined here to discuss our collective divisional opponent, and that is in the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And I'm going to do my best to abbreviate our guest's intro because he's got quite the resume and is well known throughout the interwebs to discuss his Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He is the deputy editor of Bucs Nation and the host of the Locked On Bucs podcast. And as I said earlier, I guarantee you his most vaunted accomplishment, despite all of that in all of the football world, is the fact that he is, in fact, a father. And I'm going to go ahead and bring on my friend and friend of the show, Mr. James Yarko.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Being a hockey dad is simultaneously the best and dumbest thing I've ever done in my nearly 40 years of existence. Other than that, Locked On Bucs, bucsnation.com, all that good fun stuff.
Fantastic. So, I mean, I'm a regular viewer of James's podcast. I pop in, make some comments, and then promptly leave just because no one who's a Tampa Bay Bucs fan wants to hear from a Broncos fan because why would they? The Bucs have always been a fascinating team to me. They've had these very high highs and then some substantial lows as a franchise. I think that's a fair comment to make. I don't think you'd even argue with that as a general, assessment of the franchise either. You are in an interesting spot now where would you say you would have thought Mayfield would have done as well as he did when he came to your team?
I would, and I was one of the few who were kind of pounding the table when Brady retired the second time and said, Baker Mayfield's the guy for this team. He is the right fit. Nobody wants to follow the GOAT, right? Nobody wanted to follow him in New England. And we've seen since he left just unmitigated disaster. And nobody wants to come in after that. And Baker's that guy that he doesn't care. He knows that he's not Tom Brady. He's going to come in and he's going to be him, and he's going to fit well within this team. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened. His best friend on the team is his left tackle, and I can't think of a better best friend to have. And then, of course, his relationship with Mike Evans and Chris Godwin and Rashad White and Kate Otten. They bring in his Oklahoma bestie in Sterling Shepard, and he just endears himself to this franchise. He goes around the lunchroom and sits with all the different position groups and is really the quintessential leader. And yeah, I've always been a fan of Baker ever since he was at Oklahoma. He got a raw deal in Cleveland. He went to a dumpster fire in Carolina, somehow managed to pull off an incredible comeback win. Having been with the Rams for like 3.5 hours, and he goes out there with who was his best receiver in that game, Ben Skoranek, and like leads this huge comeback win. So, I mean, Baker's that dude, and I was excited when the Bucs signed him, and I was excited when they extended him.
I think that's interesting. I thought you may have been a Baker fan from our last discussion. I wasn't sure kind of the varying degree. There's always a sliding scale when we're talking about that sort of stuff. And ladies and gentlemen, I do apologize. My green screen is a faux one behind me, which is why my hand keeps disappearing and such not. But I've recently sold my house. I'm going to be moving, and then within about a week or so, when I move, I will have my new studio built, which means my face will stay on screen properly, and the green screen will be set up accordingly as well. So all will be right in the world in about a month, sadly. But until then, sorry. I think that's a fair kind of assessment to make. I mean, Baker has been, in some regards, you can almost say almost overly confident in some regards, because it came off a certain way when you're not winning. which I think is also a fair statement to make. Again,
absolutely.
Not trying to belittle your starting quarterback or anything like that. I'm just, it is what it is. But when you come off with an overly cocky or confident attitude when you're not doing well, or maybe barely doing well, or some variation of it, you certainly present a certain way, and it can come off a certain way, and sort of thing. And then the other question is that when you come off and present as overly confident, there's a natural question of whether or not you can be coached or not. Like, are you a coachable quarterback? Are you someone that is going to say, don't worry about me, I got it, and then you kind of throw 3 interceptions in the game, or whatever the case may be? Critique to make, in fairness, because we have seen other quarterbacks with similar attitudes do just that and have the same cocky attitude and not self-reflect and actually do the right thing. I do think the only fair critique in the NFL for Baker, and I said the same thing with my former quarterback, good riddance, bye-bye, in Russell Wilson, is, you can't coach height.
Right.
And you can overcome height, right? Like, it's, we've seen it. So I mean, it's also an unfair comment to say, no, short quarterbacks can't play on the NFL. It's like, well, no, you can leave that comment at the door. There are certain things that shorter quarterbacks can do to overcome deficiencies in terms of their God-given abilities in life. But Drew Brees, I guess, would be probably the best of those examples in terms of the short quarterbacks that have killed it for all intents and purposes at the NFL level. But I do think that would be a real concern in terms of where we're seeing the NFL players go, especially considering even in this most recent draft class, you're seeing linebackers that are 6'2" being called short.
Mm-hmm.
Like, just to be clear, I think that's an important statement to make. To be 6 foot, not even 6'2", but to be 6 foot is something like 15% of the male population. Okay. Now I'm 6'2", which puts me in even rarer air when it comes to the male population. Right now, on top of all of that, you're saying, no, you need to be 6'3" or 6'4". You need to have the athletic ability to run like you're about 5'9". And you need to have a durability, like your body needs to be durable enough to basically take the abuse of getting hit by a car repeatedly in the NFL. Like, you're talking rarest of air of athletes at that point.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's wild to think that, a guy like me, I'm 5'10" on a good day, and I'm almost eye level with Baker Mayfield. And to go from running into Tom Brady after a game, and I came up to about like halfway to his chest. He was deceptively tall. And to think that, like, these guys, you have to find that, as you said, that right combination of size and speed and toughness, and we'll throw in IQ. You have to have a certain level of football IQ to be able to play this game, and you have to find these guys with the size and the speed that didn't play basketball or baseball. It's you're talking about
or any of these other extremely athletic sports. Yeah.
You're talking about like 0.5% of the people that ever played this game make it to this level. It's insane. So the size thing, especially for quarterbacks, it can be difficult. But as you said, we've seen guys do it in the past, and there are ways to overcome it. And a lot of those guys rely on their football IQ, their brain, their ability to react, pre-snap reads, who I will argue Baker Mayfield is one of, if not the best in the NFL at pre-snap reads. And then being able to have a coordinator that can design offenses that play into your strengths, where you don't have to worry about the height. You don't have to worry about those problems. And without a doubt, Drew Brees is, as much as it pains me to say it, Drew Brees is like the short quarterback king ever. You could throw it to Doug Flutie because he's that much shorter, but Flutie didn't have the career that Drew Brees did.
CFL.
That's right.
But for those of you who don't know, I am in rare air in the podcasting world because I actually exist north of the U.S. border. And to make it even more rare air, I am a well-known Broncos commentator, which is, again, odd. So we'll just kind of go there. But no, I completely agree with you. Drew Brees is probably – it will take a lot of things to take place to beat out what Drew Brees was able to accomplish with his physical stature. Like, it just – I mean, he did have a bit of a perfect storm where he had a very gifted offensive coach in Sean Payton who was able to – I think slow play his injury back into becoming a household name and kind of play to his strengths, and then kind of allow the offense to kind of pendulum swing appropriately to kind of land then squarely on his shoulders. And, it just kind of goes to show how important is coaching.
Yeah,
right.
It's extremely. It's everything. It's literally everything. You can have a super stacked team, but if you don't have the coaching to get them over the hump, everybody hates them. Everybody hates them. So I'm going to throw the name out there. I'm sure people in the chat will agree. The Dallas Cowboys over the last 3 decades have had some seriously stacked teams. They've had some of the best defenses in the NFL over that time. They've had some of the best offenses in the NFL over that time. They've had both at the same time. And their coaches have been such an absolute dumpster fire that they haven't been to the conference championship since 1994. I was 9.
Actually,
I wasn't even a thought yet.
I would disagree with that as an assessment of the Cowboys. I think as a general overarching comment, I would agree with that as an assessment. I actually think what the problem with the Cowboys isn't coaching. I think the problem with the Cowboys
ownership.
Yep.
Right.
That's certainly a big part of it.
Because when you have Jerry Jones that can't keep his damn hand out of the cookie jar.
Yep.
That's a problem.
I can get behind that to a certain extent because as much as he gets in the way, he has still brought in insane talent. And while he's not, he's not the hands-off owner that I think most Cowboys fans wish he would be, to stick with Jason Garrett for too long because he wanted to be proven right, to, bring Mitch McCarthy out of obscurity when he was a disaster in Green Bay those last couple of years. And then, Bill Parcells, there's another one. And he sticks with these guys too long because to your point, he wants to be right. He wants to show everybody that he's the smartest guy in the room, but he's done a great job of compiling these incredible rosters. You go through the list of some of the guys that have played for that team, and it's mind-boggling that they haven't made it there, but you can always point to the fact that they've had underachieving and disappointing coaching staffs.
I mean, just look at the contract situation right now with Dak. That's
or CD.
Yeah, I mean that's like the perfect, like, if there's one thing you could have said about Jerry Jones and given him a positive comment, it's that he does most of the time take care of the guys that he drafted. He's not one to really go out in free agency and poach the big fish. I think Amari Cooper might have been the last big fish, and it wasn't even a free agency. He traded for him, but for the most part, he takes care of his guys. So that's why it's so surprising that to this point, Dak and CD and Micah's coming up too that haven't been paid yet. And I mean, as much talent as he brings to the team, the negative impact he has on the coaching staff, because he's never going to hire somebody that'll go above him. And that's what they need. They need a coaching staff that is not going to get puppeted by Jerry. And that's exactly what Mike McCarthy is. He's just a puppet for him. And everybody knew it when he got hired the first time around, that like, this isn't a serious team. They're not, Jerry began this offseason saying, we're going to go all in this season. all in with what? You might have had the worst offseason out of any team this year. Not that you needed to do much because, like you said, the roster's already stacked. But when you have that big of a roster and you have this team and you don't even know if Dak, CD, Micah, or I mean, I assume Micah, but CD, Dak, you don't know if they're going to be back on the team next year. You go all in. Listen, I mean, the Texans went all in after seeing 1 year of Stroud, and they're like, all right, we saw enough. We have our QB, got our coach. He's cheap right now. Go get Stephon Diggs. Let's do this thing. Let's go compete for a Super Bowl. And I feel like Jerry, his mindset is, I don't even care how good we do. Just sell tickets, sell merch, get the media to be talking about us. And as long as we're generating, buzz in the NFL, good or bad, he's like okay with it. And I think that's where the Cowboys and Cowboy fans realistically should be very upset with their state of the team right now.
That's why I say it's an ownership issue, is that a lot of money is clearly spent on acquiring great scouts. They do a great job at scouting college players. They do a great job at generally drafting, if we're going to be honest.
Yeah, they do.
Generally speaking, they do a great job at drafting. It's hard.
I think they've drafted the most Pro Bowlers. I think like them and the Chiefs are like 1 and 2.
Yeah. And that's good for them. But to your point, the reason why I blame ownership is that if you're unwilling to put the right people in the right place, even if they overshadow you as the owner of the team, you're not putting team first. You're putting yourself first. And that is the sign of a pretty poor leader. Most guys, including, here guys like Elon Musk and others, they're like, I want to be the dumbest guy in the room. Like, I literally want to walk in and feel like an idiot. Like, in fact, I would welcome that, right? Especially when it comes to football. But I also then want to be the smartest business guy in the room, right? So Jerry, I think, is trying to become the football guy and the business guy. And at some point, he's got to know his lane and say, no, I'm a brilliant businessman, but I'm going to bring in the proper football guys to run the team. He had that for, 3 Super Bowls there for a little while, and then got upset that he wasn't being given the credit. And I think that was what the issue was. They could have had 5. I do wonder how the Bucs have managed to flip the script in such a short time, because there was a serious block of time there, really after, I'd argue, 7, I guess, left would be kind of the start of that decline, generally speaking.
After who left? I'm sorry.
Warren Sapp.
Oh, well, yeah, kind of, sort of.
There's been some short-lived spikes, but I would say he was the last big player up until recently where he was the guy that seemed to control games from a purely practical perspective. And then now, I mean, I'm using recency bias here, but obviously even before Brady got there, the Bucs were quite respectable. Like this wasn't one of those things where people are like, oh, the Bucs, that's an easy out. And I was like, nah, that's a pretty good football team. And there's some concerns there. And then really from the Brady era to even now, you haven't regressed like you have typically done throughout the franchise's history. And I think that's a testament to the owner recognizing certain things, maybe having some folks around him that he's willing to listen to, or a combination of a bunch of things. But I think that speaks volumes. Jerry Jones maybe can take some notes in terms of what you've been able to do in recent years and be truly competitive.
Yeah, it was kind of a gradual process, right? And that's one thing that I will say for the Glazer family who own the team is they're pretty hands off. They hired Jason Light and they said, you bring in your guys, you bring in the staff that you trust, and you run this team. Now, of course, he still has to go to ownership to get some approvals here and there when, they have to have 6 years in void years to be able to sign some of these guys. But you go back to kind of early Jason Light and his drafting strategies and seeing a lot of these a lot of these draft classes not work out. Famously drafted Roberto Aguayo in the second round, who was cut the next year.
Man.
I will say that was not a Jason Light decision. That came from above his head, where the previous year they had lost 3 games based on missed field goals. And those 3 games were the difference between where they finished and making the playoffs. Right. So that had been kind of something that was stressed, but they kind of changed the way they evaluated their players and who they were bringing in. So by time 2020 rolled around, you had a playoff team that was being held back by a quarterback that threw 30 interceptions. And all they needed was a quarterback. And, that was a big reason that Brady came to play there. They had Ndamukong Suh. They had Levante David on the defensive side of the ball. They had Mike Evans and Chris Godwin and a really good offensive line outside of the right tackle. So
playoff Lenny.
Worse. Yeah. And then with Brady, then you get Gronk. Then you get playoff Lenny. Then you get Antonio Brown, which was cool for like half of a season.
Oh, man.
And then he lost his mind and got naked and ran off the field in New York.
Which time? He's gotten naked a couple times.
Just the time that he danced off the field in New York. I still maintain, and I will die on this hill, if Antonio Brown does not do that, the Buccaneers go back-to-back. Because you go into that playoff game against the Rams, and you're down Antonio Brown, you're down Chris Godwin. You have Mike Evans, you have Tyler Johnson, you have Scotty Miller, you have Brashad Perryman. Those are your receivers. And it still took until the very last play for the Rams to win because of a blown coverage. So it was a situation where you have the greatest quarterback to ever play come in and say, I can win with this team and I can do it right now. I don't need training camp. We don't get it because of shutdowns and lockdowns and everything, but I'm going to run my own practices on a high school field. And I'm going to get these guys together and we're going to get this done and figured out. And that's exactly what they did. So they've kept a lot of that talent. And so it was an easy transition to go from the Brady era to the Baker era, because you're still loaded with talent from top to bottom, which continues to boggle my mind how, these odds makers have the Bucs as the second favorite team to win the division. They've won it 3 years in a row. They're the only team besides the Chiefs to make the playoffs each of the last 4 seasons. Their over under for wins, I think, was like 6.5, 7.5.
Wow.
And I'm like, yeah, every year it's that same thing. And it's the Brady effect. When Brady was there, everybody loved him. Now it's all the same players minus Brady, and they're back to being forgotten about.
And I mean, like we said, and we talked about at the beginning of the show too, and we were talking pregame a little bit too, James. I've always liked Baker, and I think we were having an argument kind of in earlier shows about, Baker is a solid player, and they were right to lock him up for the contract that they gave him. And I think he's just going to feast off it, because that's what he does. He feasts off people doubting him. And pretty much his entire career, people have doubted him, even when he was with the Browns. So I think, for you, it's probably a great thing to hear that the win total is so low, because it's just like, cool, just keep it up, keep up that same energy, and we'll just win the division again.
Yeah. Jason Light almost said that exact same thing. He was on a podcast. It's been about a month or so ago. And he says, sometimes I feel like we're in witness protection down here. People forget about us. And he's like, if anybody else, and I've said this for months, if any other team in the offseason signed Baker Mayfield, Levante David, Mike Evans, and Antoine Winfield Jr., they would have been crowned the offseason champions. They would have been crowned as having the best possible free agent class that you could have gotten. And because the Bucs brought all those guys back, it's just, whatever. The Bucs are just running it back. Who cares?
Yeah, well, I think that there's been some other teams that have done some interesting things. And I think one thing that is going to be interesting to see is with a full season of Baker with the Bucs, and this may be where the win total comes from. And I think this is, I won't say it's fair, but at least I think it's appropriate. We'll put it that way. Is people didn't know what to expect with a full season Baker Mayfield with the Bucs. They didn't know what to expect to see. Would he succeed? Would he run the offense? How would he run the offense? What would the offense look like? So on and so forth. I think those are all pretty fair kind of things to have questions about and seek answers to. So now I think where it becomes very interesting, and I think we can kind of collectively agree, is, well, now you kind of know, right? So now you kind of understand that Baker is comfortable with the Bucs. He is comfortable running that offense. He is comfortable performing in that regard. And then the question becomes, where do the other teams, how do they adjust? And then more importantly, can Baker now adjust? Because I think that's a fair question. Like, look, I understand you're a Baker fan, and I'm kind of neutral on Baker. I think he's got some great traits, and I think he's got some traits that may hold him back a little bit. However, I think it's a fair question. Can he absorb the entirety of that offense and adapt that offense and adapt how he does things to fit the adjustments that will inevitably be made when people play him?
Well, and I think it's an interesting situation because it's a new offense. Their offensive coordinator went to Carolina as the head coach. So now Liam Cohen's in there, and it's going to be an entirely new offense. And one of the things, to your point, that's really going to test Baker is when Liam Cohen calls a play, he also gives 3 or 4 other plays, and he trusts Baker and Graham Barton, a rookie center to a certain extent, Tristan, Mike. He trusts these guys to check into the right plays in the huddle and then again pre-snap, because he said, look, I can give them a play, but they're the ones that have to go up against the defense. They're the ones having to figure out where they can get an advantage. So why am I going to tell them what to do when they're the ones that have to execute it and they're going to know better what they can do? So that's putting a lot of trust in your quarterback to be able to make sure that he is giving the offense the best opportunity to succeed. And other teams have adjusted. The Falcons made a lot of really big moves. The Saints have made moves. The Panthers are going to be the Panthers. They're not a good football team. Bryce Young is not a good quarterback. I don't think, as much as I like Dave Canales, I don't think he's going to be a good head coach after only 1 year of being an offensive coordinator. He needed to wait and take a better opportunity after a little bit more time. That's just my opinion. If I'm wrong, I'll eat the crow.
So what you're saying, James, just to be clear, is that we can expect a few more drinks being thrown.
Yeah. Probably.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Cool. All right. Continue.
I mean, that's really the long and short of it is, for as much as the other teams can adjust after a year of Baker Mayfield, well, now they have to turn around and they have to readjust based on the new offense. And then Baker gets the opportunity to adjust back because he's the one, even though Liam Cohen's the offense coordinator, Baker's the one with the responsibility and is in charge of being able to make the right calls. So it's going to be, I don't know how many Big Bang Theory fans there are, but it's like 3D chess. Right? There's pieces and things everywhere because it's not just offensive coordinator versus defensive coordinator. Now it's offensive coordinator versus defensive coordinator versus quarterback. And it adds a completely different level to the game.
And I think that's fair. And then Robert, just to quickly and then the question becomes, where does the hook come in? And what I mean by that is, let's say Baker checks into the wrong play 5 times. Like I'm not saying he will. I'm just saying like where is the sliding scale? And by the way, this is not meant as a knock on Baker at all. I'm just simply saying that every coach, every team, as they continue to give a player rope, will eventually make a decision to bring in the hook to kind of reel them back in if they continue to show their hand or show tendencies or make errors or make mistakes or whatever the case may be. unless you're someone like a Peyton Manning or a Tom Brady who seem to, just be, unicorns in the football world,
I mean,
and adjust.
Do you mean 5 times in like a game, or 5 times over the course of?
No, I mean in the game.
Yeah.
I mean in the game where you start to see issues and challenges and problems and that kind of stuff, and then obviously the natural question from there is, will that then impact the game after, or are they going to then say, hey, look, you made your mistakes, let's reset and move forward?
I think it's going to be a situation where if it happens the first time, Baker's going to go back. They're going to get out their tablets, and Liam's going to sit down and say, okay, why did you check into this? Tell me what you saw, and let's see what they did. And okay, fresh start, new memory, be a goldfish, all that stuff. Get back on the field.
Yeah.
And then if it happens again, it's going to be like, okay, they're doing something that you're not catching. So I'm going to need you to just roll with me for a little bit, and let's see how this goes. Maybe reel it in after that second mistake of not giving information overload. So, but there's going to be dialogue there. There's going to be a conversation of, okay, you checked into that for a reason. What did you see versus what did they do? And then kind of go from there. And there's going to be, like I said, there's going to be conversations between Liam and Baker. There's going to be conversations between Baker and Mike, Baker and Chris Godwin, Baker and Graham Barton. There's going to be a lot of communication there from the leaders and the ones that really pull some weight in this offense to figure out the best route for them to go.
So, Robert, while we have James here, and we're comparing our teams as we look ahead to our division, I want to say one or two things that you'd like to bounce off of James as you look ahead to your way too early general look at what your rosters might look like when you compare A versus B.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I in last season, I think it was even more so true, or maybe in past seasons, I always felt like the Chargers and the Bucks had very similar traits in the fact that they always had kind of like the same 2 wide receiver duo for, the past 5 years or so. It's been, just Evans and Godwin. And then for the Chargers, obviously it was Keenan and Mike. And, you see both those guys leave for us, this past off season. So I was just actually, kind of curious what you thought about your wide receiver core, because I don't know too much. I mean, I know Scotty Miller. I don't know if he's still on the team though, but I really don't know your receivers past Godwin and Evans. So I was kind of curious what you thought, or what rookies you guys might see, or some new players we might not know about that might pop off for you guys this season, or make some plays.
Yeah, so unfortunately, Scotty Scooter Miller is in Pittsburgh after a 1-year stint in Atlanta. Last year it was kind of an issue, right? Everybody knows Evans and Godwin, but Russell Gage was supposed to be the guy. Russell Gage was supposed to be that wide receiver 3 that Baker could rely on. He gets injured in training camp, misses the whole season. He just signed with somebody yesterday or the day before.
Ooh.
But you had it might have been, it was a bird team of some sort.
Yeah.
You had Trey Palmer, who's kind of a burner, but he was a small guy. You had Raheem Jarrett, who was an undrafted rookie. You had Devin Tompkins, who's no longer on the team. David Moore came from Seattle with Dave Canales, and he was a little bit of a spark for the Bucks in a couple of different games. But he's now in Carolina. So the Bucks used their second of 2 third-round picks on Washington receiver Jalen McMillan. And Jalen McMillan would have gone a lot higher. He might have been the second Washington receiver off the board had he not dealt with injuries all last season. And it got to a point with Washington where I believe it was Odunze that sat him down and said, look, you keep trying to come back too soon. You keep aggravating the injury. You keep missing more time. Just sit out, get fully healthy. We don't need you right here. We need you in the playoffs because we can win the Natty. So we need you. And you can take a look at Washington's offense when Jalen McMillan was on the field versus when he wasn't. And it was a very, very different team. So McMillan comes in as almost a steal. And this kid, oh my goodness, he shined when it was just, shells and shorts. And it's like, well, anybody can do that. Kenny Bell from Nebraska did that for the Bucks years ago. And then as soon as the contact started, he basically took his ball and went home. We never heard from him again. So then the padded practices, the full contact starts, and he's head topping Zion McCollum. He's beating Antoine Whitfield Jr. for a touchdown. He's scoring just about every drive. And so I'm really interested to see how he performs against Cincinnati this weekend, because it's like, all right, you got over that first hurdle. Now we need to see real game snaps. But Jalen McMillan is going to be an absolute weapon for this team. And that opens things up for Mike and Chris, right? They're not the only two anymore. You have Jalen McMillan, and then you have Sterling Shepard, who I mentioned earlier. That was Baker's go-to guy at Oklahoma. And he has the opportunity to get away from the Giants and play for a team where he can keep his career going. And he even credits Saquon Barkley for telling him, you have too much left in the tank. Quit messing around, get with a team, and get back on the field. And you still have Trey Palmer there. You still have Raheem Jarrett there. But Jalen McMillan is going to really change the entire landscape of what this wide receiver room can do, because it's no longer, well, we'll double Chris, we'll double Mike, beat us with Trey Palmer and Cade Otton and Rashad White. It's, okay, we have three legitimate receivers, and all three of them can win in zone. They can win in man. They all have incredibly refined route trees. It's going to be a problem. So I love the way that this wide receiver room is shaped out. Yeah,
I like that the route the Bucks took with it, instead of just kind of like, as not trying to bag on my own team, but kind of opposite to what the Chargers did. They kind of just said, all right, we don't need wide receiver at all, and let's just solely rely on, rookies and offseason, or free agent acquisitions to, kind of run this team. But, obviously the Chargers are going to be looking to do a lot more running with the football than passing than they have in past years. But that was kind of going to go into the second question that I was going to ask you. What is your thoughts on the run game? And, obviously a run game is, a quarterback's best friend. Everybody will benefit from it, Baker especially. And like you said, with that wide receiver, now trio, how do you see the run game kind of fitting in? And like you said, with a new offensive coordinator this year as well.
It's again going to be very different from last year. At least that's the hope, right? Dead last in rushing last year, yet somehow Rashad White was only 10 yards shy of 1,000-yard season. Rashad White was outstanding, but Rashad White was the only running back. You had Chase Edmonds, who got hurt and missed time. When he was able to play, he was somewhat effective. You had Keyshawn Vaughn, who is Keyshawn gone. He got cut midseason. I think he's with the 49ers now. And then you had Sean Tucker, which was an undrafted rookie, dealt with some medical issues, which is why he went undrafted, and just never fully grasped what he needed to do. Only showed up in the first couple of games, very limited appearances. But that was an undrafted rookie that got guaranteed money. They invested heavily in him. So they bring back Chase Edmonds. Sean Tucker's still there. Then they draft Oregon running back Bucky Irving. And leading up to the draft, and I'm sure Rich will enjoy this, every chance I had to talk about running back on my podcast, I was doing everything but standing on my chair and jumping up and down and screaming, saying, draft Audric Estime. Estime is the player that this team needs, because Rashad is the quick guy, the cut guy. Estime's the bruiser. Estime's the guy that's going to come in on 4th and 1 or 3rd and goal and is going to just plow through guys.
He also has good hands.
Great hands.
Yeah.
Phenomenal. Yeah. I think he caught every target last year. And so you're not losing anything in the passing game if you want to swing the ball out to him, but you need that complement, that thunder and lightning kind of thing. Instead, they draft Bucky Irving, who is smaller than Rashad White, but he's quick, he's fast, he's a one cut and then straight line kind of guy. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized, okay, I see what the Bucs are doing here, because for years they had a running back, and I don't know how many people will remember him, but his name is Charles Sims.
Yep.
And Charles Sims was a guy that anytime he was on the field, you knew exactly what the Buccaneers were going to do, because he could only run. He couldn't catch. He couldn't block. So if Charles Sims was in the game, you knew it was a run play. And with Bucky Irving, being the secondary guy to Rachaad White, he can run on, through the inside. He can run to the outside. He can pick up blitzes, and he can catch the ball. So you're not telegraphing anything. With either guy in the game, the playbook is still wide open. And then you get to the heavy investment in rearranging the offensive line. You draft a center in the first round. All due respect to Robert Hainsey, he played great 2 years ago. Last year, he was dealing with a rookie on one side and just abysmal play on the other side. So they bring in Ben Bredesen and Sua Opeta to compete for the starting left guard position. Sua Opeta went down to an ACL tear. He's out for the season. Ben Bredesen's the starting left guard. But Graham Barton is that, high football IQ. He went to Duke. He's a smart dude. But the high IQ, physical, athletic, quick for as big as he is. So, you would hope that the inside run game is going to be much more effective than it was last year. But I was really angry when they drafted Bucky Irving at the time. I was even more angry that the Devil got to draft Audric Estime to play for the Denver Broncos. And so I hope that Sean Payton screws everything up and Audric Estime leaves in free agency after 4 years and go just about anywhere else. And I'll root for you until the cows come home. But that was a painful moment for me.
Rich, I'm gonna let you take care of that one.
Well, what made that was worked in, so I appreciate that there, James. Well done. Look, I do think that there was elements of the Broncos draft that we did very well, and I think that we also did pretty well in some undrafted guys too, which a lot of folks aren't even looking at. But I think Yasmin is a guy in the tight end room that I think is going to be kind of sneaky in terms of his athleticism. Brought up on another MHRT network podcast yesterday, where, if you're to call a guy an offensive weapon, that's basically what you call him. He's a ginormous wide receiver, but not quite a good tight end in terms of his ability to block. But that's okay, because if you use him the right way, you only really need to use him for his pass catching ability, if that's the direction you want to go in. And then you can work over the next couple of years of just generally improving his blocking, which is something that you can do with coaching. And the one thing I will give Peyton is he's a great coach. That's an undeniable general piece, as much as you'd like to hate to admit it.
He's the worst.
He's won too many games to not call him a good coach. I'm sorry. It is. It is what it is. And yes, I realize that will pain you to say that aloud. But I can look at Harbaugh for the Chargers, and it is a difficult thing to say that he is not a good coach.
Yeah. Oh, right? Absolutely. That's fair.
And so I kind of put Peyton in that same boat. I put Harbaugh's brother in that same boat, which is remarkable, having two brothers that have kind of come from the same, that are, both capable and have done what they've done. And we, of course, have a few other coaches in the NFL that have kind of proven themselves over the years as well. But we've now dwindled out of those old school OGs that we used to be familiar with. And now we're waiting to see which of the newer crop. Obviously, Peyton is in that mix now because he's back in the NFL. You have the two Harbaugh brothers, and we're waiting to see other coaches. Tomlin, I think, is a fair one to put in that position, although I do kind of agree with Biggie Bronco in the comments here. I don't know if you've noticed, but the Steelers, for all of their talent, have been pretty quick outs in the playoffs, if you're going to be brutally honest there. And at some point, if that happens once, cool. If that happens twice, cool. But now that it's repeated itself a couple times now, you have to kind of start looking back at coaching and saying, huh.
Well, I'll give them this. And yeah, they have been easy outs in the playoffs, but there aren't too many coaches like Mike Tomlin that,
Nope.
in spite of everything, in spite of Kenny Pickett and
Mason Rudolph,
he's always above 500
Yep.
every single time. And so I think they've been searching for Ben's replacement since Roethlisberger retired. Now they have Harry and Lloyd as the quarterbacks. Shout out to whoever gets that reference.
That's an amazing reference.
They still haven't found one because both of their quarterbacks are terrible.
And you know what they say, if you have two QBs, you have none.
You have none. Justin Fields is great for fantasy, but he is a god-awful quarterback. Yeah. He really is. And I don't know, Russ quietly had a strong second half to last year. And you look at his numbers, and I realize that's stat scouting, but he quietly had a respectable season.
Well, James,
I don't know if he replicates that.
No, just kidding.
I'm no Russ fan. I'm not, but it was, at least you can give me, it was a remarkable improvement over his first year with Denver. So who knows what Russell Wilson, Pittsburgh,
you were ranked 33 out of 32 quarterbacks that started in the last year. You improved. My answer to that is one would hope so.
Yeah. When you're already at the bottom, there's only one way to go.
Yeah, dude, you sucked so bad that a second-tier backup quarterback played better than you in your first year with the Broncos. It should not be seen as a huge improvement or a huge accomplishment for someone who is making the amount of money that he was slated to make and still is, to be true. Dude, you managed to make about the middle of the league at best.
Yeah.
That is not something to be proud of.
But I remember seeing, what was it? 26 touchdowns and 8 interceptions. That's solid.
It was like 220 passing
Baker was 28 and 10.
So James, this is my only comment with Russ versus Baker. How many sacks did Baker take?
40.
How many sacks did Russ take?
45.
Okay. So then on the other flip side of that, how long did Russ hold on to the ball for versus Baker?
That I don't know, but I know most of the time because of the makeshift offensive line, Baker was running for his life. It probably should have been closer to 50 or 55 sacks.
Right.
So it wasn't Baker holding the ball too long so much as he just, by the time he hit the third step on a 3-step drop, he had 2 guys in his face.
So it's 10 fumbles and 45 sacks is Russ's stats for last year. And so,
okay.
So the look, this is something that I have. Let's just say I am not a fan, and we'll just kind of leave it at that as a good banner. I have an issue with my quarterback requiring a phone book to see over his offensive line. I would have an issue with my quarterback not being willing to give his phone number to his teammates.
I
have an issue with that as well.
You're supposed to be the leader. You're supposed to be the guy that everyone can go to, and you're calling your star running back from a restricted number. Get out of here, man.
Yeah. So there's a few issues that I have with the general assessment. I don't blame you for not knowing all the ins and outs of my former starting quarterback's stats. Fair enough. Okay. But at the same time, I think that when you're comparing two quarterbacks that are a very similar stature in terms of general sizing, like Baker and Russ are about as similar as it gets, in my opinion. I think they're both around 5'11". I think they're both around the same weight. They have been compared against one another for a number of years. I do think that what Russ lacks, Baker has. And this has nothing to do with anything else other than the fact that I think Baker processes the field better.
Yeah.
I believe that Baker recognizes, because he has some self-reflection, he has the ability to turn the mirror in on himself and say, dude, I'm short, I need to do better. Right? Like, I think this is a real thing. Not a knock on height, but I think it matters, which is I have to do certain things to overcome what I cannot control. And I think that Russ, unfortunately, has said, oh, well, I'm a star dual sport athlete. I'm just going to run around the field, pop collar, and I'll be just fine. Have you seen my wife, by the way? And that's his general shtick, right? That's his thing. Whereas Baker is like, no. If I want to be successful, I have to overcome my physical deficiencies. In college, I could run around the yard and do really well. He learned the hard way in Cleveland that the NFL defenders, even though they're 300 pounds, are faster than he is.
Yeah.
Right? Like you can agree with that, I think, when you saw some of his play there in Cleveland. And it took him a little bit to get to, have that, self-reflection moment, I think, in the NFL. But to his credit, that is, he's gotten there, and that is awesome to see. I love seeing young men, even if it takes them a little longer than the fan base would prefer it took them to get there, that he got there. He kind of hit that low, said, man, I got to look at myself in the mirror. And he realized that his key to success is just being better, processing faster, reading the field, and doing those things. Russ still hasn't gotten there, but he's certainly lying to himself and saying that he has.
That is facts.
Well, and to be fair to Baker, I just looked it up. He's allegedly 1 inch taller than Drew Brees was. So they have Russ listed at 5'11", Brees 6 foot, Baker 6'1". I'm
like
also
5 pairs of socks on, or
I'm also old enough to remember when the Red Sox media guide had Dustin Pedroia listed at 5'10", and that dude was 5'3". Like, he was Wolverine. Like, dude was tiny. So again, that's on Pro Football Reference, allegedly. And look, it speaks volumes, regardless of who the player is. We can remove player names all we want. But when you see a player struggle early on, and Baker, as the example, had a great start. He was a bad call away from beating the Chiefs in the playoffs in 2020 with the Cleveland Browns. But then you have that slide. You have that issue, and he played through injury, and he did all that. But as you said, to take a look in the mirror and say, okay, where do I need to get better? Where do I need to focus my time, my energy on ensuring that I can be the best version of myself out on the field? And you see players that don't do that. And I'll throw shade at a guy I was actually working on my episode right before I jumped on. I'll throw shade at a guy that was a Buccaneer for 5 years and no longer is, Devin White.
Yep.
Devin White was that guy who, after they won the Super Bowl and he went on this incredible run, all-time run in the playoffs, all of a sudden his crap don't stink. He's not going to listen to anyone. His ego is out of control. And it gets to a point where you just expect that to happen again, and you're not putting the work in. You're not listening to your coaches. You're not listening to your teammates. You're not showing up for practices. You're making yourself a healthy scratch because you just came off of an injury and your coach says, hey, we're not going to start you. We're going to rotate you in, and you get upset about it. And instead of being the $100 million linebacker that you said at the combine that you wanted to be, you're playing on a 1-year deal with the Eagles for about what Baker got from the Bucs last year. So, and then you want to pop off at the mouth about it on a show with his name escapes me now. He was on the Pivot with the former Steelers player, and I can't remember his name now, but he wants to talk about how he was disrespected and how he didn't get what he was promised. No, dude, you didn't earn it. You didn't go out there and fight for that. And, you know, to bring it full circle, it speaks volumes when a team is willing to have $60 million of dead cap to pay you to go away.
The Broncos say, "Hold my beer."
I was gonna say, yeah. How about 85 million?
Well, yeah, I was referencing the Broncos. I mean,
yeah.
It speaks volumes when you are literally going to pay a quarter of your salary cap
to stay away,
to not have that guy on your team. It's crazy.
Yeah, I agree. So, one thing that the Bucs have typically been known for over the last few years is your interior defensive line. Obviously, we all remember that Super Bowl versus the Chiefs. I certainly do. It was a highlight for me.
I loved it. Loved every second.
It took a few weeks to wipe the smile off my face after seeing that game finish up.
Same.
Yeah, I don't doubt it. And it was all largely because of your interior line on the defensive side of the ball. I mean, realistically speaking, I mean, obviously the offense is the one that scored points, but your interior defense really prevented countering offensive touchdowns on the Chiefs, and certainly made Patrick Mahomes rather pedestrian in that game compared to what he has typically been to date, and even in recent years. So where are you at on the interior of your defensive line? We have had multiple conversations on the show, and I am certainly have never been shy, and it is well known that I am an offensive and defensive line guy. That's kind of my shtick. That's my deal. I believe that your team lives and dies by both of those two lines because I think that they do a tremendous amount to help your team. Where are you at in those regards?
Well, Vita Vea is going to be Vita Vea, right? Like, he's one of the best in the game. What I'm really excited about is the second year growth of Kalijah Kancey. And Kalijah Kancey is much smaller than Vita Vea. He's not a big guy for a defensive lineman. What he is insanely quick off of the snap, and, you know, so much faster than these guys that are trying to block him, that he can get into that backfield really, really quickly. So to see kind of his continued development, and Gerald McCoy, former Buccaneer, was at practice a couple of weeks ago working with him on refining and developing a few more of his pass rush moves. Excuse me. The big question for the Bucs is the edge rushers. You know, and those were a huge part of that Super Bowl success. You know, Jason Pierre-Paul and Shaq Barrett. Yeah. They were incredible. Absolutely incredible. Well, Shaq Barrett gets released because of the money, and they pin their hopes and dreams on a second-year player in Yaya Diaby. You have Joe Tryon-Shoyinka there, who has been a disappointment because of the spot in the draft he was taking. He was a first-round pick, and he has not lived up to that. I think his career high is 4.5 sacks in a season, and that was last year. You sign Randy Gregory to be a rotational guy. He still hasn't shown up for anything. He's completely MIA. So now you're looking at a second-round pick in Chris Braswell, a couple of guys that essentially redshirted last year in Marquise Watts and Jose Ramirez. So there's a lot of pressure on Kalijah Kancey. Say whose name? Vita Vea or Yaya Diaby?
Yeah.
Yaya Diaby. I don't know how many rap fans are watching right now, but from the moment they've drafted him, all I've wanted to do on my show is anytime I talk about him, play the clip from the very beginning of a Busta Rhymes song where he goes, yaw, 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 yaw. That's all I want to do. I need to hear it in Ray J. I need to hear it on my show. Anyway. Logan Hall still has some potential developing that he can do, but Vita Vea and Kalijah Kancey are the anchors for this. They are the ones that have to collapse the interior of the pocket to open things up for the edge rushers. And we know Todd Bowles is going to bring exotic blitzes. He's going to bring Antoine. He's going to bring Izzy in. He's going to bring Tyke Smith. He's going to bring Zion McCollum. He's going to bring people from all over the place. But you have to be able to get home with your natural pass rush. You can't rely solely on the blitz because they lived and died by the blitz last year. And luckily for them, it worked most of the time. But when it doesn't, that's when you give up explosives. That's when you give up the lead or allow a team to break a tie game and gain the lead late in a game. So
or wear you wear you out.
Yeah, exactly.
Or wear you out because you're constantly, when you blitz like that, sorry to interject, but when you blitz like that, and this is something that I think many people don't pay attention to in games, is when you blitz so frequently in order to get home, you're then taking your big guys, the ones that are, obviously have the most weight to move around, and you're forcing them to move the most and engage the most in the game by pushing on guys. And that takes a physical toll. And, fast forward to, the back end of the fourth quarter when you're, trying to, maintain that lead or take over that lead. They may not have enough gas in the tank, having to constantly have done that all game to kind of continue to have that success. And that could be, to your point, the difference of winning and losing.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's going to be a lot of expectations, and a big part of the success of the defense is going to rely on those two key guys up front. And again, Logan Hall, he's been okay. Again, not what the Bucs thought that they were going to get, or hasn't quite reached the level that they thought that they could get out of him. But they still have a decent defensive line rotation. They brought back Greg Gaines, who had a decent year last year. They brought back Will Golston, who is the longest tenured Buccaneer. He's been with the team longer than Levante David has, if that tells you anything. So I can't stress enough the health of Vita Vea being of the utmost importance for this football team. Losing Vita Vea for any amount of time on the defensive side of the ball is the equivalent to if the Bucs lost Tristan Wirfs on the offensive side of the ball. He's that vital to any success that they can have.
Interesting. There's a couple pieces there which are of interest to me. So you bring up obviously your most critical cog in Vita Vea. Looking at physical run teams, and we have made multiple comments on this show about the AFC North. That is looking like just
bloodbath,
scary bloodbath of the division.
Gauntlet.
Yeah, brutal, and looking at what you just made a comment of is saying hey, we got two guys that kind of need to stir the pot there to kind of get us to kind of win the interior battles. How do you think you're going to fare against more physical run teams? And so what I mean by that, and that physical offensive linemen as well as physical running backs. So guys like you mentioned Estime, you mentioned, we can look at even a guy, assuming he can come back and bounce back, even a guy like Javonte Williams, if he can come back true to form. He was very, very physical. And Quinn Miners, as an offensive lineman for my Denver Broncos, is another guy who's a very, very physical interior guard who would kind of potentially be going up against someone like a Vita Vea, or at least helping block a guy like Vita Vea in the run game. How have you guys typically fared when it comes to teams that are physical like that?
More often than not, the Bucs win that battle.
Okay.
And a big reason for that is, first off, Levante David, but it's because they have the bodies and the skill set to absorb what is happening at the line of scrimmage. And then the back end, that second and third level of the defense are all sure tacklers. You're not going to find many players on this defense that miss tackles very often, because if they do, they're not going to be in Todd Bowles' defense anymore. Looking at the numbers last year, they had quite a few games where they gave up 100 yards rushing, and that's not typical for what they generally do. But taking a look at it, it was against the Eagles, the Falcons, the Bills, the Niners, the Colts. We're talking about rushing quarterbacks. When you start adding those rushing quarterbacks in, that's where the Bucs have problems. They don't have problems with the physicality of bruising backs or those more assertive rushing attacks from these teams. It's the mobile quarterbacks that Todd Bowles, for whatever reason, just can't seem to really get a grasp on. So I think last year I would have to dive into all the box scores, but I think there were only 2 players that rushed for 100 yards against the Buccaneers. And I want to say it was against Philadelphia. And then one of the Panthers running backs did it, which was just mind boggling because it was the Panthers and they stink. But, those were the only 2 running backs that ever really found major success. I don't even think Christian McCaffrey rushed for 100 yards against the Buccaneers. Now he racked up a bejesus ton of receiving yards. Yeah, Christian McCaffrey, 78 yards rushing, 25 yards receiving against the Buccaneers. So
pretty tame for what McCaffrey can do.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, especially for the year that he had last year. So
right.
It's the Achilles heel is the mobile quarterbacks. When you have a guy,
break contain.
Who knows if Bo Nix is going to be that style of runner? Yeah, Justin Herbert really isn't. Patrick
but
Mahomes
he found. I was gonna say Herbert. Sorry, not to cut you off.
No, you're fine.
Herbert, that first game around when he was a rookie and you had Brady. I think that was the Super Bowl year, if I'm not mistaken. When you guys won the Super Bowl that year. Herbert's advantage was because, like you said, at the time it was a blitz heavy defense. Herbert is very good against the blitz, and we saw that in his rookie year. And against pressure, he was very good at just flinging the ball. Nobody was really expecting him, and so that's why that game was like a 24-21. It was like a kind of like a shootout back and forth for a while there.
Oh, I think the score was even more than that. It was just
like 35-28 maybe.
It was 38-31.
So we both did 30. We did break 30, both of us.
The Bucs had 369 passing yards. The Chargers had 278.
Wow, that's it. That's crazy considering.
Yeah, I thought it was way more than that.
Yeah, I thought it was too.
That one was a big time shootout.
Yeah, so. I remember.
But back then, you were in what I would argue would be vintage. What's that running back? Colorado.
Played Colorado.
He was with Colorado. You just let him go this year. Like he was the guy. He was like the little muscle hamster you guys had.
Eckler.
Oh
yeah. My God!
You were dealing with vintage Eckler at that point, right? Because remember, Philip Lindsay and Eckler were like a year apart from one another. They were both undrafted rookies, and they were both like kind of similar, except Lindsay just couldn't catch the ball as well as Eckler. Eckler was better catching the ball, but they were very similarly built. And back then, I believe Eckler was in that initial prime of his career, where he was that kind of like pure dual threat guy.
Yeah, that was the first year Eckler took over running back one duties from Gordon, because that was the offseason Gordon left.
Yeah.
Eckler had 14 total yards in that game.
Wow. That's crazy. Well, I mean, it's like you said, too, the Bucs are very good, and the Chargers were horrible at running the ball. So it really was just, and that's why that game, because I think the Chargers went up like 24-3 at one point, I think it was.
Yeah.
And then because the inability to run the ball, and this is going back to that playoff game against the Jags, why we lost that one as well, because same thing, Eckler had, I think, like -2 rushing yards in the entire second half of that playoff game. And it's what the Chargers, Oh, sorry.
It's the one thing that a lot of people forget when they're looking at those like revisionist history is just because Eckler didn't kill it in that game, he was being game planned for and was a player that any team, given what success he had leading into those games in that season, because he did have quite a bit of success in those, especially those early seasons.
Right.
He had a bit of a window there where he was meh, and then the end meh. But there was that early window where he was, really
like 2
popping.
years, 2 or 3
Yeah,
years.
he was popping off on the league, right? And so he was a very dangerous style player, because you had Philip Lindsay those first 2 years, and that was the last year I think Lindsay was really that was Lindsay's second 1,000 rush season, because he went back to back. Year 1, year 2. So that was Lindsay's second year where he kind of had that those great years. And Eckler, that was his first, because they were saying, "Oh, the new Philip Lindsay," and
Right.
he kind of popped off. And so he would have been game planned for in that game, just because he had that early success, and the Bucs would have had to account for someone like Eckler there. Now, was he a huge factor in the game? Clearly not. Not if you have 14 yards.
Yeah.
But that also means that he would have been accounted for, which would have adjusted what they could have done in, say, the pass game. Because if you're having to bring guys up in the box to stop that kind of run, or to stop that that back pass, which is really common for a guy like Eckler and Philip Lindsay, and I'm going back to like another Denver Bronco, like Noshawn Moreno was really good at that kind of stuff, where Manning would throw kind of the side pass just slightly to the outside, and Moreno will break it off for like 20, 30 yards.
Right.
I'm sure James has got a couple guys on his team that kind of done similar things. But again, same kind of general plays where the quarterback tosses for those short kind of toss yards behind the line of scrimmage or just past the line of scrimmage, and then the running back runs for like a huge gain. Eckler was that guy, and he was very dangerous those first few years, so he would have had to have been accounted for.
Yeah, well, and especially that game too, because that was Herbert's rookie year and nobody really knew what Herbert was going to be. Obviously, the one thing you're going to want to do with a rookie QB is take away the run game, let him throw it the entire time, and see if he could beat you that way. And if he does, you just kind of tip your cap and you're like, hey, it's a rookie QB. We took away the run game. Like if Herbert comes out of that game and Eckler still is only rushing for 14 yards and Herbert comes out away with a win, I don't think the Bucs are really looking at it like, damn, we didn't play our game. We played our game, and he just, I mean, you just got to kind of sit back and throw your hands up. Like, what are you going to do against that? But as you saw, and eventually the run game, I should say the non-existence of it, catches up to you in the long run. And, that was the Chargers' biggest, I guess, kryptonite, was they would get out to an early lead and they just were not able to maintain it. They couldn't kill time, and they just let the other team come back, stick around, and before you knew it, you're losing the game with zeros on the clock, and it's a field goal going through.
So I'm looking at to James here, and I'm going to ask James a couple questions to ask of us. Looking ahead at both of our teams, since you have Robert and I here to look ahead to the AFC West, are there any questions you have about our teams or players in our teams that you think that your fans or the fans of your show would want to know?
I think starting with Denver, because they come up first on the schedule. That's week 3.
Yeah.
It seems from the outside looking in that this is a very much a transitional period for the Denver Broncos. They have the rookie quarterback. You have Sean Payton there. He's starting to put his pieces in. He's starting to get rid of guys that he doesn't want around. Still have Cortland Sutton. Still have Fireball Jones, Tim Patrick. You still have a couple of solid offensive weapons. What should Bucs fans expect in terms of where the Broncos are in this kind of rebuild process?
It's an interesting one. So I think the one thing to keep in mind, and I've said this on the show before, so this is of no surprise to Robert whatsoever. I believe that a lot of teams are underestimating the Denver Broncos, generally speaking. I think a lot of teams are looking at the Denver Broncos and simply saying, oh, they're still rebuilding, and therefore don't worry about it. I think that is a banner statement that I'm hearing by many. And last year, we had no business winning the number of games we did. I'm sorry, we just did. Like, it's a fact. And I've
statement.
No, like I've been on record saying that, and I have no problem speaking to any Broncos fan that wants to challenge me on that. We won those games because of the quality of our head coach and being able to put the right players and being able to be willing, actually, to pull guys out of games that really otherwise would never have been pulled if it was any other head coach, because he's like, what are you going to do? Fire me? Right? Like, good luck with that, my man. And so, and on top of that, his risks generally paid off when you looked at the long run for last season for my Denver Broncos. So when you're looking at what we're seeing now, I think a tremendous change and shift in the Denver Broncos. You look at one of our biggest signings this offseason in Quinn Miners. What does that say to you as a opponent of the Denver Broncos? So you decided to give a big extension to one of the most physical players on your football team, who has been showcased for running and blocking angry. That is a tone setter. That is someone who is going to be in that mold, and that should say quite a bit, in my opinion, about how the Broncos wish to play football. And frankly, that's what I'm used to seeing the Broncos play football like. In the kind of when we were winning the Super Bowl, we were kind of a little bit more physical like that. And even in years past, when Pat Bullen was the owner of the team, he demanded that physicality of the team. And that is why the team was always competitive. I mean, they were always kind of this like weird team where no one really knew the Broncos, but they were always surprised that they were always winning games. Like, it was like, who is the Broncos and why do they keep winning things? It's like, well, because they kind of play angry. And so, like, there was plenty of playoff games that the Broncos would come into the playoffs and beat that and win that first round because they were just more aggressive. They wanted it more, and they had an owner who was demanding of them to play to that level and elevate themselves to that point. And that's contagious. That is a contagious component of a football team. So I think you're going to see a more physical team than you've typically seen for the Denver Broncos in years past, because our coach demands and commands that of his football team. And I think you're seeing a shift in players, as you said, out with the old and in with the new. Just because you have a bunch of household names like Justin Simmons, well, I was never a huge fan of Simmons. He's a fantastic dude off the field, model citizen off the field. No argument there. But on the field, he kind of was a bit of a selfish player where you try to go for the big splash play, the interception or this. But when you look at the physical style of play that is required and demanded of you at the safety position, he really did struggle in many regards when it came to that. And just because he was part of a tackle didn't mean he actually made the tackle.
Right.
Which is, again, a misleading stat when you look at tackles and tackles assist and that kind of stuff.
He's around the tackle.
He started making the tackle and therefore got an assist in it. Well, guess what? He didn't finish it. It's the other dude that came in after the fact that cleaned up the play because Simmons couldn't bring him down. Or, he whiffed on the tackle but was deemed as an assistant in it because they wanted to be nice that play. Like, these sorts of things are not uncommon to see in stats. And I think we're objective when we watch things and just be realistic. So I think we're seeing a shift in culture. I think you're going to see a much more physical team. You're going to see a head coach that's demanding healthier and more physical play out of their players. And as a result of that additional competition, I would expect to see young guys that you've not seen before, but then question why you haven't seen them before and why you didn't expect them to play as well. So I would kind of meld that all together.
So, obviously it is a process. And and trust me, I know all too well about a team being overlooked and undervalued and underappreciated. So what's a realistic expectation for people that don't follow the Broncos closely? Is this a 7-win football team? Is this a, are we talking like could be in contention for the wild card, because the way I kind of see it, and again, from
Wild
the
card
outside
contention.
looking in, and you know, you feel free to tell me if I'm crazy. The Broncos' schedule has a real rough start, and I can absolutely see Jared Stidham being the starter for like the first 5 weeks. And you're kind of saying, you know what? These are games that we're not really built to win yet. Let's not put our future in that situation, because you can go from Jared to Bo. You can't go from Bo to Jared.
No,
It can't happen. So I could see the Broncos getting off to a 1-4 start, be strictly based on the schedule, and not wanting to kind of undo anything that you've done with Bo Nix and kind of derail him before he even really gets started.
See, that I think is, no offense, so please don't take anything to what I'm about to say, but I think that's the wrong, like, you're looking at it the exact reverse as I am.
Okay.
Like, and I mean, literally like a complete 180 almost. So, I agree with you that you can't go backwards once you go forward. So you can't start Nix and say, whoops, we made a mistake.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I have always predicted, and Robert can attest to this, I'm on literally film and tape saying the Broncos will be making one heck of a mistake starting Bo Nix week 1. And I will continue to say that even on this show right now. The Broncos would make a huge mistake starting Bo Nix in week 1. And I got into literally a Twitter battle, which you can go look at my timeline back and forth with like 10 different people in the last week about this very same thing. So I'm remarkably consistent. So that's my stance on Nix. I think he should sit at least until mid or past mid-season.
Okay.
It is my opinion that Nix, while he is clearly looking to be picking up on things very quickly, my response as a Broncos fan is, that's awesome for the future. Right. And I think that's really important to make, because one thing Nix doesn't have yet is he's got this bit of a warped perspective while he's on the field thus far, where he's gone against the same guys over and over again. And that's fine and good for you to get like an inflated sense of self. However, man, does the NFL life change when you go against live bullets and guys that actually want to take your head off. Right. And so I think what Bo Nix needs is a bit of a dragging down to earth moment in the first preseason game or two. And then I think you're going to see some really bad plays from Nix, and then a lot of media folks in the Denver side of things try to pretend that they never happened. And of course, my comment there will be, stop being a damned liar. Look, this is why people love having me on their show as a Broncos fan, because I literally hold nose, like I will be unbelievably critical of nonsense that my team tries to pull, but I will also be praising my team when a lot of other people are unwilling to. And so, and I could not care less of where those chips fall in terms of people's opinion, because so far, I called most of the Broncos wins and most of the Broncos losses last season, including against games where people said we wouldn't win, and including games where people said they're surefire wins and we lost. And my only answer was, I told you so. So I think what you're going to see is Bo Nix should be sat. I think now, whether or not that happens, different story. Egos in the NFL are also a real thing. Okay. So we have to be mindful of that. But I do think that what you're likely looking at, due to a combination of coaching and some very sneaky talent that exists on the Broncos roster, the tight end position, at the wide receiver position, and the running back position, which are all things that they can not necessarily win you games, but they can certainly make you look better than you actually are. And on the defensive side of the ball, I think there has been enough changes through some of the secondary and linebacker spots, as well as the interior defensive line, which is a huge thing for me, where I think we're going to be kind of one of those almost playoff wild card teams. So whether that be a 9-win, 8-win or an 11-win, depending on how like a field goal goes at the end of the game or something like that. That's kind of where I have my team sitting this season. And of course, injuries and other things can adjust those totals up and down accordingly, which
absolutely,
look, I'm realistic and honest, but no one can predict that kind of crap, and I don't care who you are.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I can and I will in just a moment. I do want to respectfully disagree. I saw Big E Bronco in the comment section. He said if he's the guy, he's the guy, and he needs to start week 1. I disagree. I really truly disagree. We've gotten so far away from, and maybe I'm older than you. I don't know. There was a time when rookies didn't come in and play immediately. They developed. And when you have a guy that isn't, that isn't Peyton Manning, that isn't even Patrick Mahomes sat behind Alex Smith. Like, we need to stop this. Just because we drafted a quarterback in the first round means he has to start week 1 stuff. It has to end. Give these guys time to develop. And I realize Nix is a little bit of an exception because he is older, than Caleb Williams or Jaden Daniels or those guys. But this isn't college football anymore. These guys have to have time. How many quarterback careers have been just straight up destroyed because they were out there before they were ready? And once that confidence is gone, it's gone. You can't get that back. You can't manufacture it. You can't coach it. You can't, none of that. So I would worry more about year 5 than week 5. And that would be my approach.
So my answer to this, just to quickly jump in, James, is Alex Smith was a good but not great quarterback.
Definition of good, not great.
Yeah, he was literally he defined that banner like perfectly.
He was the best of them.
He was Kirk Cousins before Kirk Cousins.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And I think that Jared Stidham is of a similar mold. I think he's a guy that is really good and very good in meetings because I believe he's an incredibly bright and high football IQ guy, like for sure. And then the other thing that I think Broncos fans are negating, and this is going to be the second point that I want to bring up, which is Russell Wilson was, by all accounts, the equivalent of a short bus quarterback. I knew you'd like that. And he had to have the playbook, and this is reported by multiple sources, so this is not something that's like completely out of turn, although I have no problem necessarily maybe speaking more plainly than most, which is he had to have the playbook severely stripped down in order to make those reads quicker, faster, et cetera, which is the exact opposite of what we were talking about earlier in the show, James, with regards to Baker Mayfield, which was giving less options to allow processing to occur faster, is the exact opposite of what you and I were talking about earlier in the show about Baker being able to process the field and do things faster. Russ cannot take 5 plays at the line of scrimmage, assess everything in front of him quickly, and then choose the best one. It has been clear to Broncos country, and as well as some of the comments that have come from the Broncos organization, and frankly, by the fact that they're willing to eat so much dead cap, that Russ couldn't process that amount of information fast enough and then apply it to the field, which is why he's no longer with the team. And I think that that's an important piece. Now, Stidham, I think, is the exact opposite. I believe Stidham is capable of processing that. But then the question is, does he have the physical gifts to precisely do certain things at the given moments, when, say, someone like a Patrick Mahomes, Peyton Manning, a Tom Brady, like does he have that it factor? Probably not. Otherwise, he'd be a starting quarterback for, any number of 10 to 15 different teams in the NFL. But I do think that he's at that Alex Smith kind of level where He's certainly got the mental capability of identifying what should be done, but that doesn't necessarily mean he has the physical ability to do it. And I think that's the difference between A and B.
And I think the fact that we brought up Alex Smith, let's not forget how long it took him to really get his feet under. He was being called a bust, right? I mean, he was legit being labeled a bust.
And who saved his career?
So, but I did promise you that I could predict injuries, and that brings me to you, Robert.
Oh man, yeah.
Because the Bucks and Chargers don't face each other until what is that, week 16?
Yeah.
So you guys are not going to have J.K. Dobbins or the Gus bus by that point in time. They will combine. I'll set the over/under on combined Dobbins Edwards games at 7.5.
Wow. Okay. Wait. Hold on. So, are you saying like if they both play week 1, that's counts as one? Okay.
That's one game.
That's fair. I could see that. I don't believe both of them are going to be healthy for the entire duration of the season either.
Yeah. If one or the other plays in a game, that's one game, and I'm setting it at 7.5. J.K. Dobbins last year lasted 3 plays.
Yep.
Gus Edwards lasted for like 4 weeks. And I love the Gus bus. If I could drive the Gus bus, I would. Not a J.K. Dobbins fan, but we talked about that pre-show. I hate Ohio State. But you mentioned it earlier. Get rid of Keenan Allen. You get rid of Mike Williams. You draft Ladd McConkey, which a lot of people love. Everybody loves McConkey.
Love that move.
Josh Palmer is still there. Quentin Johnston.
Let's not talk about him. Let's not talk about him.
Who?
On to the next guy.
I completely forgot that you guys had DJ Chark. DJ Chark.
Who's been impressing in training camp so far. I'd like to throw that out there.
I like Chark.
I do too.
But Harbaugh is a guy that wants to ram the ball down your throat. J.J. McCarthy got drafted in the first round because he didn't have to do anything as a quarterback because they just ran the ball all the time.
Blake Corum.
When he did throw, it was, short. It was easy. It was completed. You can go back to his 49ers days. Kaepernick could throw, didn't get asked to do it a whole lot because they had a great running game and he was a big part of the running game.
Mm-hmm.
So what is the identity of this Chargers team without their top 2 wide receivers now? If they lose Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins for any period of time.
Well, we do have obviously the running back room kind of behind those 2 guys is Isaiah Spiller, who's with the team last season. So he's kind of like the only one that I believe of the crop from last season stayed. Obviously Eckler was gone. A couple of the other backups weren't to huge deals, so didn't have any financial commitments to them. And then you have our 4th round pick, I want to say, 4th round pick in Kamani Vidal. And he's kind of been the guy that's been looked at as, and fantasy football pundits are always trying to predict, who's back, which of these backups are going to come in and kind of, take the reins. He's been kind of a guy that's been talked about as, if, should, or I should say maybe when one of, Gus Edwards or J.K. Dobbins goes down, he's going to be the kind of guy to slot in there. Tote the rock a little bit, can catch a little bit out of the backfield. Is obviously not as well as Eckler. Eckler was probably that's where he really shined with the offense, was his receiving ability, because his running ability wasn't really all there. His run after the catch was there, and it's kind of tough to be like, well, how are you so good running with the ball in your hands after a catch, but you just take the handoff and all of a sudden you forget. But I digress. I still believe it will be a heavy run team. But the flip side to that is you have a quarterback who can, and what you've seen him be able to just straight gun it. And, if he really needs to, if the run game is just not there, I will say one thing with this team is we're not going to give up on the run game as quick. I definitely believe Harbaugh will probably go a solid half of a football game, maybe even a little bit more, before deciding like, okay, we need to switch to straight passes. But I also think that's why you drafted Joe Alt at left tackle, because you need, and Slater, and depending on what they do with them, it's still kind of up in the air. We've seen in training camp so far, Harbaugh kind of likes to play around and have everybody kind of play different positions. It seems it's kind of like just like a, God forbid some injuries happen in the middle of the season and we need to shuffle a little bit around. Guys aren't necessarily playing that position for their first time, so he's trying to get them a little acclimated with it. So he's played at left, he's played over at right. I think maybe I even saw him at guard once in a video. I might be wrong on that, but that was just like, why? Like, no, he belongs on the edge. But we'll move on from that. He's definitely turning this team into a tough, hard out that's going to be not just somebody that a team will come in and be like, oh well, it's the Chargers, they're gonna find a way to screw it up, they're gonna find a way to lose the game, even if we're up by 30 when we still have the fourth quarter. It's still a thing where it's like, oh yeah, how are they going to screw it up, like that playoff game against the Jags. I never thought for 1 second we were ever going to win that game, not once. And you could ask every Charger fan that I was on Twitter with and the group chats with. None of us, like the real Charger fans, ever were complacent with like a 30-point lead. It was like, nope, give me 50, give me 60. Like, I don't stop scoring, because knowing this team and what they've been in the past, they've just collapsed on themselves. And I feel like that is something that in and of itself is something that Harbaugh is going to change instantly. And those games where you're up 10, up 14 in the fourth quarter, you're not going to be sweating bullets like, how are we going to lose this? How are we going to choke this game away? That will be, I hope, a thing of the past, and it's going to be more so of, okay, is it going to be just an amazing play that beats us? It's not going to be us beating ourselves. It's not going to be us fumbling the game away. If we have the ball with 3 minutes left, I trust that the team will be able to run out the clock like you're supposed to with the lead, and it's not going to be a lot of Herbert has to constantly save us. And I mean, like, there was even a game last year where Herbert, I think it was to Josh Palmer, threw like a 30-yard bomb when we were backed up at our own like 10-yard line on fourth down, because fourth and Staley, I mean, he just he was just nonstop trying to go for it, and in that Vikings game too. But I think those stupid mental mistakes that losing teams make and losing franchises make, I would hope to think that Harbaugh fixes those, and those are a thing of the past. And that in and of itself, I would like to believe gives you 3, maybe 4 wins that you didn't get last season, based on just awful coaching, awful scheming, not being able to use some of these guys we had last season to their fullest ability. And you see them play bad in a scheme. That level of confidence, and as like you said, James, it's a little bit different with QBs, but just as a team morale in general, if you're constantly blowing games, it's hard to feel good about anything, because you can't even feel good about a solid lead, because you've known in the past to have blown it. And I think that mindset, that loser mentality, and it was a loser mentality that this team had under Brandon Staley and under coaches previous to him. I finally think this will be the year where that is a thing of the past, just because Harbaugh is not going to let that shit slide. It is not going to be you fumbled the game away, we'll get them next week. No, it's going to be get your ass out of my face. I don't even want to see you right now. Like, no.
There's no way you had a loser mentality when you had a quarterback on your team that had 11 kids. Sorry, I had to add that in.
The best trash talker ever.
I will give you that.
Dude, that's a winner in my book. He rocked a bolo tie and had 11 children, so good for him.
Yes.
Okay. Like,
Philip Rivers wasn't a loser. The team was.
He rocked the bolo tie against Cincinnati in the playoffs, didn't he?
Yeah, you did.
Yes, he did.
You did.
I remember that.
You did. But with regards to that, Robert, and this is just tying back to what James just said, because I think it's a super interesting point, is Harbaugh is known for that physical style of play, which is exactly what you just agreed with. So oddly enough, the two of you are in lockstep in terms of what you believe your identity is going to be.
Right.
However, the one thing that I don't think was fully addressed there, which is going to be interesting, which is you signed 2 running backs in the offseason that are there for what they're known for, which is a physical style of running play.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing that they're also known for, which is also what the Chargers are known for, which is injured. So,
Right.
So you have this, A versus B issue, which is like your head coach is wanting to be the physical type guy and do the thing and be chest beating. Look at us, I dare you to block this, so on and so forth, which is a great thing, by the way, because it really does. Like you hear Shannon Sharp and Mark Schlereth from my Denver Broncos, and they've been very clear. Like the most demoralizing thing for an opposing team is when you line up in I'm going to run the ball, and you run the ball,
and the team can't stop you,
and you do it for 10 yards, and they can't stop you.
Yep.
Like there is nothing more demoralizing than that. Like you literally eat the soul of your opponent when you do things like that.
That's why the Seahawks were so scary with Lynch, because everybody in the stadium knew where the ball was going, and it didn't matter.
But now the issue is what happens when you have your two main running backs that are there on your team and were signed to do, the thing, and you no longer have potentially, I'm not saying it's a guarantee, but history's a thing.
Right.
When you no longer have those guys potentially playing for you, if James has his prediction come true by week 7.
Well, I would say the answer to yeah, man. Okay. What was it? 7.5 games you set the line at?
Yeah, 7.5.
Sorry. By week 8. Sorry, one game off.
Well, it doesn't have to necessarily be by week 8. They could both play the first 2 weeks,
right?
And both be out for the next 6, and then come back. It just total.
Here and this is my response to that is because and obviously we've gotten a lot of that. The team wants to be a run first team, a heavy run first team. That's what Harbaugh's been doing at every franchise. Oh, pupper, love dogs. But everywhere Harbaugh's been, it's been toting the rock. That's what I was. Yeah, I would, and I think that's where Richie tied into is we won a lot more games last year than we should have.
Yeah. Yeah.
But just kind of talking about that, I feel like, and I've been saying this since the start, and obviously it's not going to be known until the season happens. But I feel like, and I think even Harbaugh maybe believes this. Herbert is the best. Herbert is the best QB that Harbaugh has coached. Yes. And is probably going to coach. And I think we could all agree on that, right? I think we could all agree that Herbert is definitely the most talented, but I think just straight up, he's probably the best QB that Harbaugh's ever coached. Every other QB that Harbaugh has coached, you needed that run game to supplement the mediocre to the mediocre to slightly above mediocre passing ability of his teams. Alex Smith wasn't, like we just talked about, the greatest passer, but he did enough. He certainly wasn't losing you games. Kaepernick was a little bit more dynamic with his legs. He wasn't much of a thrower, but he threw when he needed to, and he made some pretty good throws, I can argue. I mean, they went to a Super Bowl. You don't get to a Super Bowl without having some above average quarterback play at least.
The Harbaugh.
The Harbaugh. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, where the lights went out. But I feel like Harbaugh, knowing that Herbert can carry that load should he need to eventually at any point in the season, gives him a little bit of calmness, I guess I should say, of like not being like, shit, both our starting running backs are out. What the hell are we going to do? I feel like he has that confidence in Herbert, and he should realistically, based on what Herbert has done, that we can still try to run the ball with the guys we have. And I feel like that's going to be another big thing with Chargers teams prior backups, and the depth of the team as a whole was awful because the coaching was so bad. And a lot of these guys that maybe could have made the team or maybe could have contributed to the team at any point in the season were not able to show their full ability because of the coaching staff. I feel like the mark of a great coaching staff is not, this is my system and everybody around me, no matter who we draft, is going to adhere to this system tooth and nail. It's
the Lovie Smith style.
Correct. Yes. The Lovie Smith style. I feel like the mark of a good coach, and I'm sure you guys would agree, is somebody who's like, okay, what are the biggest strengths of my team as a whole. Now, what can these guys do? Maybe they're not able to contribute, perfectly in the scheme, but they have certain traits about them that we can utilize and we can empower this team with. And I feel like that's why the Chiefs are so consistently great, is because they have a head coach that is able to utilize, hell, even if you get one play out of a backup and it's for a touchdown, for that is a small step, but a huge in the overall process of it.
Right. So I just, we're getting closer to the end of the show, and I think there's going to be some additional value in rhyming off maybe a few players that each of our teams may not know. And I think that's where James kind of steps in for our audience, and perhaps where we can certainly step in for James's audience here, who will be hopefully watching this after the fact, or even are watching live and are just not commenting. But in terms of who are 3 players, Robert, and we'll start with you, on your Chargers that you think James and his Bucks probably don't know, but should know come your game near, I guess you said week 16, James, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, the first one, and I mentioned him earlier, assuming the injuries happen, is going to be Kamani Vidal. He's going to be someone that I feel like they're going to kind of plan plays for early, and kind of preparation for if one of these starters should get hurt, we kind of have already some plays ready to go. We've kind of prepared for this. So he's somebody I feel like will definitely, come in, provide some solid snaps, some solid reps, and you could still function a viable run game with him. And then flipping it over, to the defensive side of the ball, somebody who I feel like is going to take a big step this year, and talking about the D-line, Rich, is a Tui Tuipulotu, who was our second round defensive end pick from last year out of UCLA, local kid. And he's somebody I feel like was heavily held down by that inept coaching staff, and his abilities are really going to be on display this season. I feel like Harbaugh and Jesse Minter will do a fantastic job of getting him to play up to his ability. And if we can get him to play up to the ability that I've seen just on film and flashes of plays, I feel like that, coupled with Bosa, Mack, some of these other guys in the interior, Morgan Fox as a D tackle, I feel like we can definitely generate some pressure to try to, disrupt Baker and get him out of his groove, because that O-line is stout. The Bucs O-line is very good, and that's going to be the way to beat him, because if you don't get Baker out of his rhythm, he's going to dice you up all day, and he gets that confidence going, and you're just at his will by that point. So those are 2, and then to round it off, obviously, I mean, it has to be Joel, and I know that's not somebody that's like not a well-known, but I mean, that's just somebody I feel like teams are going to have to game plan for, because he's going to be a guy that can remove somebody from your pass rush, and somebody that can really put a halt to it. So I know it's not a lesser known player, but I feel like it's just somebody, it's a rookie, so you maybe don't expect too much out of him, but I feel like Joe Alt will come in and he's going to make it very difficult for that pass rush to really hound Herbert and the run game.
So I'll go next. I think there's going to be a wide receiver that's going to be a lesser known guy, but we will all know him because I predicted him being drafted by my Denver Broncos, and he did. And that was Devon Vele. That's a Vele. He is a younger version of a Tim Patrick. He is of a similar size and frame, skill set, etc. And I certainly think that after this preseason, I encourage you to watch this preseason game. You'll see him make a few plays and say, who's that guy? He's that great blend between the blockability in terms of being able to block on the run game, because he's not quite the size of a tight end, but he's almost the size of a tight end, but he runs like a wide receiver. And so I think he's someone that I think Broncos country and our opponents are likely going to familiarize themselves with. He was also fantastic on special teams in college, and I expect that will be the reason why he makes the 53-man roster for my Denver Broncos, is because he was such a good special teams player in college. So that's one. Second, I think another one to keep an eye on is going to be Lavelle Bailey. He is a college free agent at the inside linebacker position. He has been touted multiple times publicly to the media by Sean Payton. Payton does not do those things lightly. He is very close to the chest when it comes to compliments. And certainly whenever he mentions somebody's name, they typically make the 53-man roster. Like, it's just kind of the way it works. And he's a college free agent in this year in 2024. And they are already talking about him taking reps at Mike Backer. That's almost unheard of in a Sean Payton type system, because Payton is that old school coach. It's like, you're a rookie, freaking prove it. Right? He's got that old school mentality, as we were talking about earlier, James. So I think even if he's not necessarily the starter per se, he is most definitely going to be on the field. And he's a guy that I think that as your Bucs fan base, for example, and also just generally speaking, you're going to say, who's that guy? Because he wasn't like a draft. He wasn't drafted high or anything like that, but he's certainly in the mix right now to be the Denver Broncos starting inside linebacker as a college free agency rookie, which again, I can't stress enough how weird and rare that is in a Sean Payton, led team. And that's one there. And then I'm going to kind of toss up two just because they're in the same group. And I think that it's important because it will depend on who gets called up when. So I think Audric Estime makes the team. I think he's going to make the 53-man roster. Okay. Like, I just think that's, take that to the bank. We're good. The guy that I think either will make the 53 or will end up on the practice squad if he's not stolen by another team come waiver wire stuff is going to be a guy by the name of Blake Watson. And I think Watson is going to start being in the mix for returns. And he's also a guy that is kind of similar role to Jaleel McLaughlin, who was an excellent kind of dual threat, but mostly a pass catching, change of pace type guy for the Broncos last year. Scat back style. Blake Watson's a little bit bigger, and he's got a little bit more run options for my Denver Broncos. And I think that we may see with the new kickoff, return rules and all that kind of stuff, that a guy like Blake Watson could really do some damage when it comes to stuff like that, because they're used to running in tight spaces, having the ball attempt to be batted out of their hands, that kind of stuff. So I think Blake Watson could really show out, may well make the 53 as a result of that type of play, and could certainly turn some heads because he was James, I think you mentioned with one of your guys on your roster, he was given a tremendous amount of guaranteed money as a college free agent. And again, that kind of often tips your hand a little bit in terms of how a team feels about someone. Biggie just kind of chimed in here. Blake Watson's about kind of like a poor man's Reggie Bush sort of thing, which is a good, analogy to kind of, get people who know football kind of what to expect from someone like him. So those are three guys that I intentionally went lesser known. There's some other folks that I think will also, obviously be household names or at least be well known on my Broncos. But those are three that I think are going to be lesser known that I think you should pay attention to.
Well, and for the Bucs, and this might be lesser known around the Broncos game than it would be by the Chargers game. But the first one that comes to mind is Zion McCollum. He is the new starting corner for the Buccaneers. He's a third-year player out of Sam Houston State. And this was a guy, we had the opportunity to interview his coach from Sam Houston. And he said, look, Zion's an incredible athlete. He's incredibly intelligent, but he's going to take a little bit. He's going to take a little while to adjust to the game, to grow and to get comfortable enough. But you're going to see a moment where it all clicks. That moment happened last year. With the injuries to Carlton Davis and Jamel Dean, Zion McCollum stepped in and started a lot of games and started at safety during the playoffs because the safety play next to Antoine Winfield Jr. was so bad that Todd Bowles said, look, this is one of my guys. He can make plays. I need him on the field. And then you get to the offseason and the Bucs felt comfortable enough to trade away their number one corner so that they could promote Zion McCollum to being a starter. So this is a guy who it's huge.
Yeah.
And
That's big.
What says even more is this team has rallied around him and his bold prediction for himself. He has 0 career interceptions. He dropped at least 4 last year, and he is saying that he wants 6 this season. The last Buccaneers corner to get 6 interceptions in a season, Aqib Talib, back in 2010. Wow. In order to achieve this goal, he bought a jugs machine and taught his wife how to operate it. And every single day they would go around to different fields throughout the Tampa area, and he would work on his catching. He has been balling out in practice. He has put in the work. He's put in the effort. It's going to show on the field. So Zion McCollum, by the time we get to the Chargers game, he might be looking for that 6th interception, but he is an absolute dog, and he has scratched and clawed his way from a day 3 pick to a starting corner in that 3-year span, going from 0 starts to, I believe last year he had 6 or 7. It's been a huge jump for him. The next guy, I already mentioned Jalen McMillan, already talked about him a little bit. That's a name that most people are probably going to remember from Washington, so I'm not going to include him in mine. It is going to be the other running back, Bucky Irving, and he's going to have not just a role in the run and the pass game, but he's also going to be the starting kick returner. And as we know, these new kickoff rules, that's a game-changing play waiting to happen. I would be willing to bet a very small amount of money. I'll bet $5. I'll bet a 6-pack of beer. That we will. Damn,
a 6-pack of beer is $5 for you? That must be nice.
Well, no, I'm willing to go up.
Oh, okay, all right.
But none of that IPA nonsense. Like just a normal, get it at your grocery store. Anyway, we are going to set a record for the most kickoff returns for touchdowns in a season in NFL history. And I don't mean the Buccaneers. I mean, as a league, we are going to see more kickoff returns for touchdowns in a season than we have ever seen because of these rule changes. And when you have a guy like a Bucky Irving that can be back there returning kicks that, as I mentioned before, is one cut and then straight speed, those are going to turn into touchdowns. We are going to see situations where the Dolphins are going to be down by 4 points with under 2 minutes left, and Tyreek is going to go return a kick. We are going to see whoever Ayuk plays for, he's going to go back there and return a kick. They are going to take top players on the offenses with speed. Devon Achane, I'm just going to mention all the Dolphins players because they all run a 3.540 inexplicably.
It's like a requirement to be on the Dolphins team.
Yeah,
it's exactly what it is. But you are going to see those guys back returning kicks because it is such a game-changing play. And when you need that spark, when you need that moment, it's like Deshaun Jackson with the Eagles. It's like Antonio Brown with the Steelers. He even did it with the Bucs a little bit. You're going to see those guys, and it's going to lead to game-deciding scores. So Bucky Irving is going to be a huge factor in that aspect of the game as well, on top of the receiving and the rushing. And then the last name that I'm going to mention, I'm going to go to one of the backup linebackers, but it's Servassier Dennis, second-year player out of Pitt. He's going to be backing up KJ Britt, who is the starter taking over for Devin White. Servassier Dennis, when I sat down after that draft to watch Kalijah Cansey film, could not stop watching Servassier Dennis. This guy is a playmaker waiting to happen. He just needs the opportunity, which he's going to be a rotational guy this year. He's going to get a lot more opportunity than he did last year, but he's got to stay healthy. He even talked about it with the media that he needs to stay healthy. And then he turns around and he gets hurt. It's not a serious injury, but he gets hurt during practice earlier this week. And now, he's probably not going to play this weekend against Cincinnati, but this guy is just, I don't really have a good comp for him. He's almost, if you could bottle all of the Devin White blitzing ability and turn it into a guy that does that in both the passing game, but also is a sure tackler against running backs coming out of the backfield in the run or the pass game, that's Servassier Dennis. He's a blitzer. He has solid hands and can intercept the ball. He's got that peanut punch down where he's forcing turnovers. He's going to, by the end of the year, you're probably looking, by the Broncos game, you're looking at 70-30 KJ Britt to Servassier Dennis in terms of snaps. By the Chargers game, we're talking a 50-50 split. And we're talking that's the guy that's going to be on the field on third down passing situations. So yeah, those are the guys. Zion McCollum, Bucky Irving, Servassier Dennis. Those are names that non-Bucks fans are going to get familiar with this year.
Well, I mean, this is why we do these shows, is to get players that a lot of our teams will be unfamiliar with, get those names out in front so that we are well versed ahead of our games when we go against each other. And, I'm sure this is going to be some film for James to go back and look at ahead of our games now and be like, wait a minute, who's that dude? And okay, good to know. Because we obviously have quite a bit of film and time where we are paying attention to our own teams as we interact with our own fans and engage on X or whichever other platform we're on, because we often get approached for those things. But with that in mind, guys, we've had a great show tonight. James has been phenomenally generous with his time this evening. If we could please give a solid round of applause for sticking with us. James and I volley back and forth regularly on X, and I expect that to continue to happen because why wouldn't it? I just think it's great. James has been a fantastic friend of the show. I'd like to thank him for joining us again tonight, guys. And until next week, where we're going to have preseason games to talk about that. Preseason football to start talking about. We're so close, next week, guys, and get into that. So until next week, guys, where the West Side is the best side. Peace.
Fast lane when I pass in the street, bag of money in the passenger seat. Tempo's been asking for me on the road from the west to the east. Way up, I might never come down, cause the coast racking up the flame out. So high, I might never come down, so what, this is my lifestyle.